Michael Thornton stood in his driveway, coffee mug in hand, staring at the certified letter as if it might spontaneously combust. The morning sun cast long shadows across his newly built detached garage, the very structure that had apparently triggered this bureaucratic nightmare. He read the notice again, the words no less absurd on the second pass. Final notice of violation. $110,000 per day fine for unauthorized garage structure. Failure to comply with Whispering Pines HOA architectural guidelines. Immediate demolition required. Michael's laugh was hollow as he looked up at his modest home on the outskirts of Riverdale. He purchased the 3-acre property specifically because it wasn't part of any homeowners association. After 15 years in a suburban HOA where he battled over everything from his mailbox color to the height of his grass, Michael had done his due diligence. His property deed, survey, and all county records confirmed one irrefutable fact. He wasn't part of Whispering Pines or any other HOA. "This has to be a joke," he muttered, but the official letterhead and threatening legal language suggested otherwise. At 58, Michael had finally retired from his engineering career 6 months ago. The detached garage, a spacious workshop where he planned to restore vintage motorcycles, was his retirement gift to himself. He'd obtained all the proper building permits, had every inspection signed off, and even notified his adjacent neighbors as a courtesy. Inside his kitchen, Michael spread the HOA documents across the counter. The letter detailed supposed violations dating back 3 months with daily fines that had been accruing silently, while he willfully ignored previous notices. The problem was there had been no previous notices. The letter threatened imminent legal action, property lines, and forced demolition if he didn't comply within 72 hours. Michael's phone rang. It was his neighbor Alina, a retired attorney who lived on the 5-acre property to his east. "Michael, did you get one too?" Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "A crazy fine from an HOA I don't belong to." "Yeah, just now." "Me too. And so did the Hendersons and the Paddles. Something's not right here." Michael grabbed his truck keys. "I'm heading to the county recorder's office. This ends today." The county office was unusually busy for a Tuesday morning. In the records department, Michael joined a line of frustrated-looking people clutching similar letters. Ahead of him, a woman in her 60s was arguing with the clerk. "I've owned this property for 22 years. There was never an HOA." The clerk looked overwhelmed. "Ma'am, we're investigating. Something seems to have changed in the system." When Michael finally reached the counter, he presented his deed and the violation letter. The clerk's face fell as she typed his address into the computer. "Mr. Thornton, according to our records, your property was incorporated into the Whispering Pines HOA expansion 3 months ago." "That's impossible. I never signed anything." She turned the monitor so he could see. There it was, his property now shaded in the same color as the upscale Whispering Pines development nearly a mile away. "How does a property get added to an HOA without the owner's consent?" Michael demanded. "It shouldn't," she admitted, lowering her voice. "But there's been a rash of unusual changes to property records recently. The county assessor is investigating." As Michael left the office, his phone buzzed with a text from Alina. "Meeting at my house tonight, 7 p.m. Found something interesting about Whispering Pines Development Corp." In his truck, Michael noticed a black SUV with tinted windows slowly cruising past his property. The vehicle bore the Whispering Pines HOA logo on its door, a stylized pine tree that suddenly seemed more menacing than decorative. The driver appeared to be photographing his garage. What had begun as a bureaucratic error was starting to feel like something far more sinister, and the 72-hour deadline was ticking. By 7 that evening, Alina's living room was packed with 23 homeowners, all clutching identical violation notices with astronomical fines. The collective amount was staggering, over $50 million in supposed violations, with the daily tally climbing by the minute. Michael recognized most of his neighbors, their properties forming a rough horseshoe around the eastern edge of the upscale Whispering Pines development. Alina, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood by a large whiteboard she'd wheeled in from her home office. In her 30 years as a corporate attorney, she developed a reputation for finding patterns where others saw chaos. "First, what we know," she began, uncapping a marker. 3 months ago, the Whispering Pines HOA supposedly expanded to include our properties. None of us received notice. None of us consented. Yet somehow, county records were updated to reflect this change. She wrote on the board, asterisk, "How did our properties get annexed without our knowledge, asterisk?" Second question. Why target our specific properties? She circled the area on a printed map. What's special about this horseshoe of land? Michael studied the map, his engineer's mind recognizing the pattern. "Water access," he said suddenly. "Every property they're claiming has either stream frontage or abuts the water's protection area." Nods around the room confirmed his observation. Elena added it to the board. Tom Henderson, a retired city planner, raised his hand. I made some calls to my old colleagues. Whispering Pines filed permits last month for a massive expansion. Luxury condos, a golf course, and a private marina on Riverbend Lake. But they can't build near the water, said Anil Patel, an environmental scientist. Those protections have been in place for decades. Unless, Elena replied, they control all the surrounding properties and can vote to request a zoning variance as a unified block. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just facing arbitrary HOA overreach. They were targets in a calculated land grab. I found something else, Elena continued, opening her laptop. Whispering Pines Development Corporation was purchased 6 months ago by Nexus Properties, a shell company that traces back to Verticorp International. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. Verticorp, the same multinational corporation he refused to sell his patents to before retirement. The same company that had been buying up water rights across 3 states. They're not after our garages or fence heights, he said grimly. They're after our land, and they're using the HOA as a weapon. Elena nodded. These fines aren't meant to be paid. They are meant to be impossible to pay. They want lions on our properties so they can foreclose. But how do they change county records? Asked Maria Delgado, who owned the largest property in their group. That's got to be illegal. It is, came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see a thin man in his 30s with a county ID badge. He introduced himself as Jeffrey Winters from the records department. I shouldn't be here, he said nervously, but what's happening isn't right. 3 months ago, our systems were upgraded by a contractor. Since then, property designations have been changing. When we try to correct them, they revert overnight. He placed a flash drive on Elena's coffee table. This is evidence of database tampering. Multiple properties, not just yours, have been altered. The county executive doesn't want this getting out. There's talk of a cover-up. Why would the county be involved? Someone asked. Follow the tax revenue, Jeffrey replied. Verticorp's development would generate millions. Some officials are already counting that money. Elena picked up the flash drive. This is enough for an emergency injunction. Maybe not, Jeffrey warned. Judge Harmon, who handles most property disputes, played golf with Verticorp's CEO last weekend. Michael checked his watch. Less than 48 hours remained before the HOA's deadline. Michael hardly slept that night. The knowledge that strangers had been inside his home left him vigilant, checking windows and doors every hour. By dawn, he had installed security cameras from his garage workshop and moved important documents to a fireproof safe. At 7 a.m., his doorbell rang. Outside stood a woman in her 40s wearing an impeccable suit, flanked by 2 men whose blazers did little to hide their athletic builds. Mr. Thornton, Vanessa Mercer, executive director of Whispering Pines, HOA. Her smile never reached her eyes. May we come in to discuss your compliance options? No, Michael replied flatly, and you're trespassing. Mercer's smile tightened. Actually, as representatives of your homeowners association, we have easement rights for inspection purposes. I don't belong to your HOA. Never have. Michael held up his phone. And you're being recorded. The woman's composure slipped for just a moment before she regained her professional demeanor. Mr. Thornton, being difficult only makes this worse. The fines are legally binding. We can place a lion on your property by this afternoon. Try it, Michael replied. My attorney will be interested to see the documentation showing I ever joined your association. As he closed the door, his phone buzzed with a group text from Elena. Asterisk emergency meeting, 9 a.m. Community center. Media will be there asterisk. Michael arrived to find the small community center buzzing with activity. Local reporters set up cameras while Elena coordinated with a tall black woman in a crisp pantsuit, Congresswoman Diane Taylor, whose district included Riverdale. This isn't just about your neighborhood, the Congresswoman was saying. We've identified similar patterns in 3 counties, private water rights being consolidated through questionable means. Michael greeted several neighbors before Elena pulled him aside. Michael, this got bigger overnight. Jeffrey Winters was fired this morning, but not before he sent the evidence to state investigators. And look at this. She showed him her tablet displaying a geological survey map overlaid with property boundaries. Verticorp's hydrologists discovered something 3 months ago. There's an aquifer under our properties, one of the largest untapped freshwater reserves in the state. And with the drought entering its 3rd year, Michael began. Whoever controls that water controls everything, Elena finished. These HOA tactics are just the visible part. They've been buying mineral rights, bribing officials, even redirecting stream flow to create artificial shortages in certain areas. The community center doors burst open as Sheriff Dawson entered, followed by 2 deputies and Vanessa Mercer. Sorry to interrupt, the sheriff announced, but I have court orders to post notices of impending lion on several properties for HOA violations. Congresswoman Taylor stepped forward. "Sheriff, I'd advise caution. These homeowners have evidence of fraud and records tampering." "Not my jurisdiction, Congresswoman," Dawson replied. "Court says post the notices, I post the notices." Michael noticed how the sheriff avoided eye contact with anyone but Mercer, another compromised official. Actually came a new voice: "It is your jurisdiction if the court orders were obtained fraudulently." A man in a dark suit flashed a badge. "Special Agent Ramirez, FBI. We're investigating Verticorp International for RICO violations, computer fraud, and public corruption." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Sheriff Dawson's face paled as Agent Ramirez continued. "Sheriff, your department's budget suddenly increased by $2 million last quarter through a community safety grant from Nexus Properties. Care to explain that connection before my team executes search warrants at your office?" As the sheriff stammered, Vanessa Mercer tried to slip away, only to be stopped by another agent at the door. "Ms. Mercer, we have some questions about your company's database activities, specifically unauthorized access to county records systems." For the first time since this ordeal began, Michael felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. His phone rang, a neighbor who hadn't come to the meeting. "Michael, there are bulldozers at your property. They're taking down your garage." Michael raced to his truck, followed by Elena and several others. Agent Ramirez was quickly on the radio, calling for backup. When Michael screeched into his driveway 10 minutes later, the scene made his blood boil. 2 bulldozers and a crew of workers were positioned around his garage workshop. A man in a hard hat was directing operations while consulting a tablet. "Stop!" Michael shouted, leaping from his truck. "This is private property." The foreman barely glanced at him. "Got demolition orders right here, signed by Judge Harmon. Structure violates HOA guidelines and must be removed immediately." 2 days later, Michael sat in Elena's dining room, which had been transformed into a war room. Laptops, documents, and maps covered every surface. The hastily formed coalition, now calling themselves the Riverdale Water Rights Alliance, had grown to include homeowners from neighboring counties facing similar HOA takeover attempts. Martin Chen, Verticorp's former environmental director, hunched over a laptop, his thin face haggard from stress. He'd arrived the previous evening with a hard drive containing what he called the blueprint for water monopolization. "I joined Verticorp believing in their sustainable water management initiative," Chen explained, pulling up complex spreadsheets. "But last year, their strategy shifted. They began targeting aquifers, purchasing land, and manipulating water quality data." He pointed to a map displaying a network spanning 3 states. "This isn't just about your neighborhood. It's a systematic plan to control the region's water supply. During the next drought cycle, they'll be positioned to dictate terms to entire municipalities." Michael studied the documents, recognizing the calculated precision behind what had seemed like isolated incidents. The fake HOA violations, the manipulated county records, they're creating pressure points to force sales. "Exactly," Chen nodded. "And Judge Harmon isn't their only judicial asset. They've donated to election campaigns for 7 county judges across the region." "What about the water rationing?" asked Tom Henderson. "People are already lining up at distribution centers." Chen's expression darkened. "They've been selectively restricting flow at key infrastructure points. There's no actual shortage, just manufactured scarcity." As the group strategized, Congresswoman Taylor's chief of staff entered with news. The FBI executed search warrants at Verticorp's regional office. They're seizing servers and documents now. A ripple of cautious optimism spread through the room, but Michael remained skeptical. Verticorp's lawyers will tie this up for years. Meanwhile, they'll continue acquiring properties and water rights. "That's why we need a 2-pronged approach," Elena said, "legal action and public pressure." By midnight, they had formulated a plan. While federal investigations proceeded, it would expose Verticorp's tactics through a coordinated media campaign. Chen's evidence would be her cornerstone. As the meeting dispersed, Michael returned home to find a sleek black car parked in his driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit leaned against the hood. "Mr. Thornton," the man said smoothly, "Lawrence Voss, CEO of Verticorp. I thought we should talk directly." Michael tensed, aware of the security cameras recording. Nothing to talk about. Voss smiled. "Always the direct approach. It's what made you such a formidable engineer. Your water filtration patents were brilliant, by the way. We still want them. Not for sale. Neither are my patents nor my land." "Everyone has a price, Mr. Thornton," Voss gestured expansively. "We're prepared to offer you $5 million for your property. 10 times market value. Plus a consulting position with our R&D division." When Michael didn't respond, Voss continued. "The alternative is messier. Martin Chen has violated numerous NDAs. We'll bury him in litigation. Your neighbors will face similar legal battles, expensive, exhausting fights that could stretch for decades." "Is that a threat?" A reality check. You're facing a corporation with $14 billion in annual revenue and legal teams in 12 countries. Boss handed Michael a business card. Call me by noon tomorrow when you've thought it through. After that, certain wheels cannot be unturned. After Voss departed, Michael immediately called Elena and Agent Ramirez. Within an hour, a plan was set in motion. The next morning, precisely at noon, Lawrence Voss received not one call but dozens from reporters across the country. Michael, standing beside Congresswoman Taylor at a press conference, was publicly revealing everything: the falsified HOA documents, the manipulated property records, the artificial water crisis, and now the direct bribe attempt. Martin Chen appeared via video link, presenting documentation of Verticorp's watershed dominance strategy. Simultaneously, the Riverdale Water Rights Alliance launched a website publishing all evidence, with timestamps and authentication measures to prevent claims of fabrication. Within hours, Verticorp's stock plummeted 12%. By evening, 3 state attorneys general had announced investigations. The company's board called an emergency meeting. Michael should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt a growing unease. Verticorp had too much invested to surrender without a final countermove. His instincts proved correct at 2 a.m. when Alina called in a panic. The standoff at Riverdale Creek lasted 36 hours. As dawn broke on that first morning, residents formed a human chain across their properties, preventing Verticorp's crews from completing their water diversion. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of armed private security facing off against homeowners. Social media exploded with the surreal images: a corporation using paramilitary tactics over what had begun as an HOA dispute about a garage. Hashtag water rights and hashtag Riverdale resistance trended nationally. Environmental activists, property rights advocates, and anti-corporate groups found rare common ground rallying behind the Riverdale homeowners. By noon, the governor had called Lawrence Voss directly. Their heated conversation leaked to the press within the hour. FBI agents established a perimeter, creating a buffer between residents and Verticorp's security contractors. Congresswoman Taylor worked the phones, pressuring federal agencies to revoke the emergency permits. Through it all, Michael never left the front line, becoming the accidental face of the resistance. His simple story, a retiree who built a garage on his own property, then faced financial ruin from an HOA he never joined, resonated across political divides. "This isn't about one garage or even one neighborhood," he told reporters during an impromptu press conference. "It's about whether corporations can fabricate emergencies and manipulate records to seize private property and natural resources." Behind the scenes, the legal battle intensified. Verticorp's attorneys filed injunctions in 3 jurisdictions. Elena coordinated pro bono legal teams working around the clock to counter each move. Martin Chen testified before a hastily convened congressional subcommittee, presenting evidence of Verticorp's systematic water monopolization strategy. On the afternoon of the second day, the tide turned decisively. A federal judge issued an emergency injunction halting all Verticorp operations in the watershed area. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced an investigation into potential securities fraud related to the company's undisclosed water acquisition strategy. 3 major pension funds announced they were divesting from Verticorp over governance concerns. As Verticorp's stock plunged another 22%, the company's board made its move. Lawrence Voss was placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. The company issued a statement announcing the immediate cessation of all disputed property actions and an external review of compliance procedures. By sunset, the bulldozers and security contractors were withdrawing. Residents erupted in celebration, though Michael and Elena remained cautiously optimistic. "They're retreating, not surrendering," Elena warned. "Corporate entities have long memories and deep pockets," she was right. The battle for Riverdale evolved into a war of attrition fought through court filings, regulatory hearings, and shareholder meetings. For 18 months, Michael attended depositions, testified before state legislatures, and declined increasingly generous settlement offers that always included ironclad confidentiality agreements. "They're not just buying property," he told Elena after rejecting a $12 million offer. "They're buying silence. If we take these deals, no one learns from what happened here." The turning point came unexpectedly. During discovery in a class action lawsuit, Verticorp was forced to disclose internal communications revealing that the fake HOA scheme had been deployed in 7 states. The scandal widened as evidence emerged of similar tactics used to acquire land for pipeline routes, mining operations, and commercial developments. 23 months after Michael received that first outrageous HOA fine, the final resolution began to take shape. Under immense legal, regulatory, and shareholder pressure, Verticorp's new leadership agreed to a historic settlement: full restoration of the watershed to its natural state, legal recognition that all affected properties were not subject to HOA governance, a $1.2 billion remediation and compensation fund for affected communities, criminal referrals for executives who had orchestrated the scheme, Most crucially, the establishment of the Riverdale Community Water Trust, a nonprofit entity that would hold permanent conservation easements on the aquifer, ensuring it remained a public resource in perpetuity. On a crisp autumn morning 3 years after the ordeal began, Michael stood in his driveway, coffee mug in hand, watching the final restoration work on the creek that ran along his eastern property line. His rebuilt garage workshop, larger and better equipped than the original, now housed not only his motorcycle restoration projects but also water monitoring equipment maintained by local university students.